Biking has helped me through a lot of hard times. The toughest was definitely the death of my mom. Catherine was my mother, but also my best friend, my closest ally and hero. When she was dying, I turned to writing for therapy. Go sweat out my demons. Try to make something beautiful out of my pain. That kind of a thing. Biking doesn't work for everything, and it's not for everyone, but it's what I had, and it's given me a lot. My mom died the day before I turned 18. It's a lot for a kid to process. You could say biking's my coping mechanism. You could say that, and I'd agree. The thing about coping mechanisms, though, is that they are so much more than just a defensive, reactionary response. Coping mechanisms are also a creative, constructive process that give form to an individual's personality and evolving interaction with the world. It is this creative, constructive power that has brought me 1,500 miles to ride in Libby, a tiny town tucked into the far northwest corner of rural Montana. My mother's death helped strengthen biking's intimate relationship with my own growth and development. Now I want to use this coping mechanism to bring out the beauty of my mother's hometown, and with this beauty, shed light on the implications of its tragic past for those of us still breathing. Once a booming mine and lumber mill town, Libby has a lot to offer. Fishing, skiing, mountain biking, floating, swimming, hiking, camping, and cheap living. This is an outdoor enthusiast's paradise. Unfortunately, Libby is known for something else as well. Once the bedrock of the local economy, the legacy of Libby's extraction industry is still cutting through the lungs of many residents. With a population of less than 3,000, this town has seen asbestos from its mine kill over 400 people. Over 2,000 have been diagnosed with asbestos-related diseases, many with the expectation that their illness will be fatal. This includes mine employees, but also their spouses, children, and many who simply lived in the area. My mom died from a very rare form of cancer, with so few cases that it's impossible to say if asbestos caused it. Still, I sympathize with those who have lost loved ones to asbestos' effects. Had I been born earlier, I would remember watching my mother care for her father, who died from asbestos-related cancer after 34 years working for the mine. The acquittal of Grace Mining Company in court has not left Libby residents with a unified understanding of where to place the blame. Some see a corporate conspiracy to trade lives for profits, pointing to the company's policy of administering chest x-rays but never disclosing when lung disease was visible. Others see a company neither vicious nor greedy, but one that made a judgment error when weighing the health hazards of asbestos against the economic hazard of closing the mine for the community. Still others see a benevolent company acting to the best of its knowledge at the time. Fingers also get pointed at the government agencies that failed to regulate the safety of Grace Mining Company's operations. Fierce debate surrounds every view, fueled by emotions both deeply personal and political. I personally find the mining company's actions highly suspicious, and am left with contradictory accounts as to what role, if any, my grandfather played as one of the mine's engineers in downplaying the dust that would kill him and so many others. While the question of blame is important, very much so, it is not the only question that we should ask. We also don't have to agree on who to blame in order to start addressing Libby's even more consequential question. What do we do? All we really need to agree on is that there's a problem with what has happened to Libby. People from my mother's hometown have had to suffer for things they did not sign up for. They did not know how dangerous the dust they breathed could be when they decided to work at the mine, or run on the high school track paved with its tailings, or play in the piles of dirt behind the baseball field. Whether this is because the company itself didn't know those risks, or because it hid them, the fact remains that 400 people are dead. Unplanned for problems will always arise, and sometimes the agents who cause them will be unable or unwilling, again, take your pick, to deal with them. This holds true whether Grace knew the dangers of its mining operation and kept it a secret, or acted faithfully to the best of its knowledge at the time. Whether Grace filed bankruptcy to skirt responsibility for its actions, or was driven under by a mistake genuinely beyond its means to foresee or address. Any way you look at it, people from my mother's hometown were left to pay for what the mine unearthed, at a price too high for many of them to survive. I've never watched the slow toll of asbestosis, the microscopic stabbing of the lungs by asbestos's needle-like fibers, which, over the years, transform the inside of a person's lungs into a thick, leather-like layer of scar tissue. I've never witnessed someone slowly suffocate on dry land, their rigid lungs no longer able to take in the oxygen they need. So I can't judge what's worse, death by asbestosis, or death by the various forms of cancer which asbestos can induce. But after watching my mother die, I can say that cancer is a fucked up way to go. We can reduce how many of us die horrible deaths by making sure our decisions are informed by accurate and relevant information. The mining industry is a great illustration of the private sector's capacity for generating incredible resources of knowledge, but also its inability to ensure that knowledge is produced and shared even if it leads to short-term losses. Ensuring foresight, enforcing transparency, and dealing with unplanned catastrophes. These are ways that government can serve a valuable role. This by no means places government intervention beyond critique. All organizations, both private and public, carry some degree of inefficiency and a potential for abuse. Libby's current economic quagmire is often blamed on strong government regulation. At the same time, government regulators are also blamed for Libby's health crisis, this time for not being strong enough to force the mine's compliance with the regulations that did exist during its operation. This may seem like a double standard, and in many ways it is, but it reveals some useful criteria for judging our government's regulation standards. First, do they accomplish regulation's primary goal? For example, do they ensure employees understand workplace hazards so they can decide if their pay is worth the risk? If so, then do they create the fewest secondary problems? For example, are economic burdens minimized and regulatory capture avoided? Regulation which passes both conditions may not give everybody everything they want, but is the best option available and should be enforced. If a regulation passes the first condition but fails the second, we should replace it with something better. If a policy passes the second condition without accomplishing the first, however, it misses the point of regulation entirely. Those in favor of simply abolishing regulations should be reminded of my mother's hometown, so that short-term gains are not foolishly exchanged for survival. And here, I'm speaking of survival for both biological beings like my grandfather, as well as corporate entities like Grace. We must not shy away from the fact that regulation can create new problems, whose burdens are often shouldered by those living in rural communities like Libby. Such burdens do not erase the old ones, however. Libby proves, unfortunately, that you can have both. Simply rolling back government oversight is clearly the most efficient way to minimize regulatory burdens, but to do so simply ignores why regulation was needed in the first place. There is no silver bullet. We can disagree on who's to blame for the dead, but the implications are the same regardless. My mother's hometown shows why we need both efficient and effective regulation. Please, let us not allow for such a tragedy to happen again.